Thanks very much. So David Hughes, I arrived yesterday. I live in Wales, although I spend most of my time outside the UK. I'm traveling about 280, 300 days a year. And I talk so relentlessly around the known world. My customers they could be retailers, food manufacturers, conferences, exhibitions, whatever you will. And I sit on boards from time to time too of companies and various research organizations. So whatever I put up here, it will be available on a website. I thought you'd got me for 2 hours, so there's a great bloody swatch of stuff here, and I'll just wander through, flip through some, and stick with others. And I wanted to start sort of broad. I'm so familiar with this, and it just gets me started. It's just to remind us that I think we're at 7.2 billion people in the world. Is that a lot? I asked my audience. Is that a lot? Do you think that's a lot? That's a lot? Yeah. Although billion seems to have lost its worth, really. And certainly in the UK, they say it's only going to cost another billion. You know, when we're talking about, they say that's 1,000 million, for goodness sake. But why I think it's a lot is if I went back to August 1973, which is 43 years ago, my wife and I emigrated from the UK to Canada, and in August 1973 there was 3.6 billion people in the world. So in my professional lifetime, the population of the world has doubled, which sort of astonishes me. And actually we've largely coped. In terms of the proportion of people who are malnourished is less, the proportion is less than it was 40 or 50 years ago. When you look at the detail, let's move on. We're going to add another 2 billion, which is what gets the headlines. You know, wow, great opportunity, or, dear Lord, it's going to be awful. So we've got an extra 2 billion people plus arriving over the next 20 or 30 years, maybe 35 years. But again, if you look at the detail, we're going to double the population of Africa. Is that, what do you think? Is that a sort of brilliant food marketing opportunity, or is it a social problem? Both. Yes, both. Probably both. And then, just as identified by the chairman, what do people get really interested in? It's this sort of adding a billion to Asia, where you've got a lot of people already and their incomes are going up, and you can see their diets changing, and it has a real categorical impact on whatever market we're in. Because back to the Chinese example, if there's 1.3 billion, if they elect to eat 1 kilogram of anything extra, then we've got to find 1.3 million tons. Whether it be cabbage or what the hell, or lamb. I come from Europe, where let's sort of park the current Iraq, Syria, the immigration problem that we have at the moment. Just park that. That's tragic. But in general, the expectation is that some countries will be going backwards, some will be going forwards, more going forward than expected 6 months ago, I tell you. So who's a losing population in Europe? Park the Syrians for the moment. Germany. Yes. Yeah, dramatically, actually. Almost any country that's Roman Catholic. And why so? Because they're moving from having like 4 children to 1 very quick, in say a generation and a half. So it's good news and bad news. But actually, if I take a look at my country, the UK, we have, even without the more recent immigration thing, we have a mini population boom, and we're still bringing people through the door. So at 65 million this year or last year, we expect to add another 10 over the next 20 years. So increasing, we would probably be bigger than Germany in terms of population in 20, 25 years' time. You wonder where we're going to put them all. But there we go. But then sort of just relate that to somewhere like Japan, where you can see every year in Japan there's 1 million less consumers. Can you imagine operating in a market like that? And it explains a great deal about how small the retail margins are, particularly for grocery, where Walmart struggles to just make a dime there, because each year they're just fighting for a declining pie. But I was doing I'm trying to raise the tone here. It's a dog life, no more in Japan. That actually more cats, fewer higher income maintenance kids and dogs. I was doing some work on pet foods, and that's a brilliant opportunity there. How much do you think we love our cats? Can we be anthropomorphic? I would think so. And here we are, less and less children, less and less dogs because there's too much fuss, but lots more cats. Brilliant. Yeah. And who's that dominated by globally? And then down the bottom, if you take Nestle, Mars, and Colgate-Palmolive, I don't know what proportion of the global premium pet food market would they have? 70%? Something like that. Is that high margin? That's very, very high margin, I can assure you. And then just very quickly, if you think about the demographics of, I'm on developed countries at the moment, or relatively high income country. It's that, so the demographics are sort of intriguing. Last Friday, 3 days ago, I was just showing some Australian retailers around stores in London, and I was asking them the question, in Australia or in New Zealand, in Auckland, actually, you tell me, what proportion of households in Auckland would be one person? A third. Yeah. I say in London it's well past 40. Getting close to 50% of households. So what? Is that just sort of pleasant cocktail conversation? It has a profound impact on food markets. Can you imagine you don't sell a shoulder of lamb to a household of one. And again in my market, or to a household of two for that matter. And that's 67% of households in the UK. That's London and the rest of the country. And it just shows. So what happens with those small households? What's the impact on the food industry? What do we tend to do more of if you're in small households? Eat out, eat convenient, etc. No, just it. And before I get into the guts of what I wanted to talk about, I want to just look. The environment, the business environment in which we operate, and it's already been mentioned if you take dairy, is sort of governed by what are international food prices. Okay, so if we went, I'm sure some of you do the same as me, every month FAO put out their Global Food Price Index, which is like a basket of commodities, the prices, and it just sort of tracks what's happened over time. So here we go, 1973, whoops, that's when I moved to Canada. Not as a result of me being there. Actually, I went as a food policy analyst. It was the only way I could get in. The Canadians are still a bit picky, and they have that point system. Maybe do you have the same? Yeah. And they wanted plumbers, electricians, and food policy analysts. And I'm sort of pretty feckless with my hands. So that was all about the great grain robbery when the Russian grain harvest failed in the Ukraine. It was a closed economy. They didn't tell anybody. They went up, bought all the spare grain, and then announced it on one day. And at the same time, it was the beginning of OPEC. And I think that's really important. Up went prices. And I can remember it, I'm of a great age. So I'd be about 24, something like that. And at that stage, and I can remember people saying, the world has changed. It's a different era for food prices. From here on in, food prices will be higher and more volatile. And then about a year later, we went through a 30-year period where in real terms food prices were relatively stable and actually trended down. And let's call it the supermarket, the Walmart era, if you will, where it was a brilliant time for consumers. And prices were relatively declining, and the proportion of our income spent on food just went down and down and down and down, from like about 25% in the UK there to about 10% there. And then suddenly, round about 2006, 2007, this sort of stuff happened. What was that about? What was that about? So look, you see, oil, lots of things were happening then, but what sort of intrigued me was people said, the world has changed. There's a new era of much higher prices and increasing volatility. And then we've seen now, this is about the 4th year of food price declines. And I think, if we went out to 2020 here, what do you think is going to happen here? That's what dairy farmers are asking. That's what farmers are asking. Because if it was a continuation of that, my Lord, Lord. Although I don't think necessarily so. But one of the major reasons why we've seen this sort of is this increasing disasters associated by what we refer to as climate events. Not very, for a highly scientific university, this isn't very scientific data. But if you look at it, would seem that climate is much less predictable over time. But it's much, much more than that. If I look around, climate and weather events, we seem to get more, which suddenly will skew what's happening to international markets. It's farmers, it was always ever thus, farmers' response to high prices. Say in New Zealand, the New Zealand dairy farmer, I say this, and you can see the New Zealand dairy farmers, their chests swell in pride and say, you're the best in the world at converting high milk prices into high land prices. You're brilliant at it. And then you've got to cope with the consequences if there's a collapse. So farmer supply response, I mean, what farmers like is a bloody good disaster somewhere else. That's sort of ideal. Yeah, they're brilliant. There's been excellent. Oil prices, production expansion in marginal areas. So as we get more population, particularly in emerging countries, there's an attempt to keep food self-sufficiency at decent, politically acceptable levels. So you push production out into marginal areas, which tend to be they're less predictable in terms of yield. We're seeing more of that, and that will continue. Oil prices and the demand for, so if you can see, through the period where oil prices were going up, that sucked grain into the oil business, which drove food prices even higher. And then you see the collapse in oil prices, and now it doesn't make sense to put grain or oilseeds into renewable fuel, and so that sort of accelerated the downward pressure. Livestock disease and events, the avian flu, economic downturns, we're seeing that out in key markets, political events, and so there's a whole raft of reasons which tells me that we will see much more volatile food prices going forward. And so in Europe, for example, who would have predicted, Russian food embargo leaves Europe with glut of fruit, pork, and it's a disaster in Europe. Okay, so Ukraine, Russia, we fall out. So Russia says, no, we don't want any European food. So it's got to go somewhere, and it stays in Europe and depresses prices. Russian ban on food imports, more countries restrict. Suddenly, Canadian beef export following one BSE, one mad cow case, and they're banned from 20 markets. This one is a lovely one. Norway, back to 2010, gives a Nobel Prize to a Chinese political dissident, and the Chinese response is to ban imports of Norwegian salmon. I mean, again, you try and put that into a business plan. And who was celebrating? The Chileans. US export at risk as bird flu hits heart of poultry. Eggs rationed in America in 2015. They were rationed in America. I mean, Americans cannot spell ration. And yet they were going to fast food outlets where breakfast was not on offer because you couldn't buy eggs, etc. So here we go. Cheap imports force UK pig farmers. It's a chaotic in Europe at the moment. Here we go. French poultry, bird flu fears. We just seem to see more of this. Whataburger limits breakfast hours amid egg short. Who would have put that down last year? And then suddenly we get this. Global stock markets dive on China worries. So this is the beginning of the year, and it still continues. And so in the middle, not that I'm particularly prescient, but in the middle of 2014, I was looking at the global economy grew by just under 3%. More than a half of that growth was a result of China. Well, terrific. But then I said, but what if it stops? What if it stops? Wow. And it did. Well, not stop. It went from 8 to 5.5. And now, fingers crossed that China and India both don't catch a cold, an economic cold. Because if you look at the proportion of total global economic growth accounted for by those two countries, well over 50%. So you slow down in China, that puts more and more weight, if you will, on the Indian economy. And the expectation is, well, that will pick up the slack. Well, will it? If it doesn't, you'll see dairy prices down there for a while yet, I would suggest. And then, China, great market. We're going to hear lots from you, and terrific. But it's not without its risk. If we take Yum Brands owns KFC, Pizza Hut, all those sort of wonderful restaurants. And if you look at China's operation as a proportion of total for Yum, so for KFC, for Pizza Hut, etc., it's 25% of their global revenue and 36% of their global operating profit. And then last year they had a problem. 2014-15 had a serious food safety problem with chicken, and people stopped going to KFC. So now what are Yum Brands doing is saying, we have to have a separate company for China because it's just too dodgy, it's too risky to have it part of our global company because it can sink us if things go wrong. So, volatile, I think we're going to see lots of, and this isn't just emerging country stuff. We're quite capable of cocking it up ourselves in Europe. We all remember the wonderful Horsegate scandal, etc., and the damage that can do. So we'll just park that. It's so the last little bit on emerging countries is, so what? My expectation is you'll see increasing volatility. Well, I think from a New Zealand point of view, if you're in the export business, and particularly if you're focusing heavily on emerging markets, what you have to take into account is, let's take this example here. Philippines, the lady that's shopping in Manila Market spends 50% of her income on food for the family. Okay. Whereas in the UK it would be 10%. So what happens if the price of rice doubles? Does that lady buy more rice or less rice? I'll tell you something, she won't buy less. She may have to buy more. It's what economists would call an inferior good. Yeah. What will she buy less of? Those things she was just getting used to. Those that were discretionary items. Maybe trying to trade up a little bit on meat. Maybe buy more meat. She'll cut back on those. So if you see international volatile food prices driven by grain, then it just makes it much more riskier from a higher value product perspective. And that's what you guys are in. So just watch it. And also I'm reminded, I was in Changsha just before Christmas in a Walmart, as you do. Incidentally, if you want to find out what a country eats, in any country actually, just go and see what's on special in a major supermarket. But what sort of intrigued me there is, again, not very scientific, retail fresh meat prices in Changsha, China. So the cheapest, I put these on an index basis, if chicken legs were 100, then lamb hot pot, which would be half New Zealand and half Mongolian probably, we'd be selling the flaps, as you call them, would be 7 times the price of the cheapest meat. And that's the point again. What do you think will suffer if there are economic problems in China? Well, exactly that. It's those higher value cuts will get hit. And also I think it puts a real, for those exporting, where you've got products which are often 4 or 5, 6, 7 times as expensive as an alternative, then you have to be really good with your consumer. You have to say, okay, I'm willing, so finish the sentence for me. So this will be a lady, say, shopping in this Walmart, and she's thinking, I might trade up today. I'm willing to pay 8 times more for your lovely lamb product than for the alternative that I normally buy, because. Now finish the sentence. Well, right, and there'll be lots of, but we've got to have an answer. It's not on a whim.
Because we've got guests coming for dinner.
Yeah, it could be that, although no, that's unlikely in that context because they'd probably go out, but I take your point. Yeah, but I take your point. But there's got to be reasons. And I think that's the challenge when you're dealing with super premium products. Because that's what they are relative to the lower priced alternative there. Moving on. And, you know, do I have hope for the dairy industry? Yes, I do. I just notice as I sort of wander around the airports of the world that I don't see any other agricultural products being sold next to perfumes apart from full cream. You know, you never see Brussels sprouts in airport duty free. And it's just here we are in Australia right at the moment. Woolworths accused of cancelling baby formula orders from Asian Australians because they fancied that they were trying to accumulate to sell on the grey market you mentioned back into China. You know, so you've got something with intrinsic worth here. It just happens to be the wrong time in the cycle, I would suggest. So let me just moving on. Remember, we've got to do this quickly and get through what I think is happening in the food industry. So let's go back to developed countries. The poor news, if you're in developed countries, is that in most markets I go to, per capita consumption of meat is clearly at best static, but in general declining. Okay. Almost every high-income country I go to, meat consumption per person is declining. And for a whole host of reasons, aging, well, I'm a manifestation of this, and what I normally do here, just to upset people, is why do you think older, well, what happens when you've gone, imagine you've gone past 60, dear Lord. How might you change your diet, if at all? Do you think you do? What do you do?
Teeth problems, you chew less.
Sorry?
Teeth problems, you chew less.
You chew less, does that be kind? I've got quite a good set of gnashes. Yeah. You eat less. What would you eat less of?
Less sugar because it might be pre-diabetic.
Yes, less sugar. In general, it's less meat. Tends to be more fruit and veg. You suddenly have a peculiar interest in fish. And, you know, and why would this be? Why do you think it's 60? I mean, for some of you who can't even imagine it, it's because I do this every time. Because when you're 60, and if you stand on a chair and look out, then you can see the end. and you go, that's the end. Bugger. You know, I don't want the end. I want to be fit and healthy through old age. And then there's a sort of unseemly rush to try and fix the problem that you created over the last 40 years, where suddenly it's about exercise and fruit and vegetables and et cetera, et cetera. When you look at a baby boomer population moving into retirement, that has a profound impact on markets like meat markets. But the good news is that in my particular case, and in many like me, I'm going to eat less meat, but when I eat meat, I want to eat better. And I'm quite happy to pay more for less. If you've got the things in that meat product that meet my requirements, that are consonant with my lifestyle, which, as I say, I want adjectives with my meat, but ones that mean something to me. I'll come back to that. So here we go. How do you like your meat? With adjectives, please. You know, known provenance, a farm, you know, perhaps an old breed, grass-fed, suckler this, vegetarian that, free range this, single estate. We start to use wine language for meat. Free from, happy, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And that's right across more than developed countries, just everywhere I go, particularly with better off, higher income, middle class folk. So here I'm in Thailand. It's pork, but it's all natural, free range and herb fed pork. They want happy pork. Well, at least for a fair proportion of its life. They want around the world so. And I think that gives a bit of a challenge for you. I wanted to put this in somewhere, so I'll just sort of flop it in here. That what's intrigued me, if we look at this, you know, the contentious area of genetic modification, etc., you've got this salmon, which has now got FDA approval, GM salmon in the US, and its grow-out period is half that of regular salmon. I think that's going to be a challenge to be in a premium market. Will it be accepted? I would think it will be accepted, but not at the premium end of the market. There we go. So back on to pet food, just because I was on it. Sales of pet food growing at a much faster rate than other packaged goods. Look at this miserable, boy, it's hard work in the food industry. Little or no growth, and here this is pet food growth. And where is it? It's on the premium end of the market too. Brilliant. And is it just in high-income countries? It's everywhere in the world. The high stress we go for. We want more pets. And I think meat has a particular problem, actually. And particularly in higher income in so-called developed countries, is more and more pressure. It must be the same here, where eat less meat for environmental reasons, for health reasons. It's just the drip, drip on the stone. And meat industry people hate it. And they think it's some sort of communist conspiracy. And then out comes the World Health Organization say, it'll bloody kill you, particularly if it's processed. Meats, of course, clearly over the top. But what I'm intrigued about is if I look around the world, you start to see meat analogues really getting some traction. I was working just before Christmas in the Philippines, and here we are in a relatively low-income country. Here's a Filipino company that bought Quorn, which has been in the UK and North America and Europe for 20 years now, and paying the better part of $1 billion. And they believe that's got potential for Asia. And so Quorn is a mycoprotein, like a mushroom, which has got the mouthfeel of meat. Put a sauce on, and you can't tell the difference between it and chicken. Here we go. And there's been a level of investment in plant-based protein that I haven't seen in 50 years. Here we've got, amongst others, Bill and Melinda putting 100 million plus into Impossible Foods for its plant-based burgers. I mean, that's a huge, if you think of the difficulty we have in universities of trying to get research monies, and then look at the amount of money, it's like into meat analogues, there's been $1 billion gone in the last 4 years. Something will come out of that. Also, if we take dairy, this is, why do I put this up? Here's Ben & Jerry's. We all know Ben & Jerry's, and it's non-dairy ice cream. Why I put this one up is because this isn't some sort of never new world company. This is Unilever. And that's now firmly on their list, non-dairy dairy. This sort of rise, if you will, of plant-based proteins. Here we go, 7-Eleven and Whole Foods. So this is in the US. We have Just Mayo, which is pea protein-based mayonnaise. And again, I put this up because in November 2014, Unilever, who own Hellmann's mayonnaise, the biggest mayonnaise brand in the world, they were going to sue Hampton Creek for their plant-based Just Mayo, saying you can't call it mayonnaise if it hasn't got eggs in. That was November 14. By February 2016, they dropped their litigation, and they've launched their own. Something going on there, isn't there? So and this is just for fun, really. But so are we all going? Is the world turning vegetarian or vegan? I don't think so. But this is really good news. I tell the red meat guys. Remember, red meat guys. I don't want to offend anybody in the audience, but I do a lot of work in the world of meat, and red meat guys increasingly look like the animals they slaughter. They're big men with large hands and no necks, and they bellow a lot. And this makes them feel a lot better. So vegetarians have much lower sperm counts. So I've got nothing against vegetarians, but my view, it's not very scientific, and I shouldn't be saying it at the university here, but my view is that over the next couple of generations, we'll probably breed the bastards out. There won't be any left. There we go. And anyway, if 300 grams of liver, you've got the equivalent on iron is 2.5 kilos of spinach. That's a day's work. There we go. So, okay, so what's happening in the world of food? Like many of us, I'm sure, I like to go to Sial and Anuga, do every year that I can. And why I value this is we've got a series of attributes of successful food products launched in 2014. And I use this when I'm working with food manufacturers, etc., saying, how many ticks can you put against your product? It is food, is it tasty? So they've tracked The launch of new food products in 2014 identified the attributes which are being sold part and parcel. And tasty, convenient to buy, to prepare, to eat. Health, nutrition, and wellness hooks. Yes, this provenance, this heritage, this producer link is so important. We want values. We want value and values in our food. This move towards natural, minimum processed, clean, simple ingredients, huge. We started to see that 12, 13, 14, and it's now just a big wave. Yes, we like premium, but it's got to be affordable luxury and snackable. I'm missing a couple out here just for time. So, look at your food product. To what extent can you relate to those? And then let's go to Anuga, so to Cologne this last year. What were their trends doing, their equivalent, the CL. Clean and clear labels coming across so strongly. Convenience for foodies. I may be a foodie, but that doesn't mean I want to work hard for my food. I still want it convenient. And it's really interesting too, I might say for the health and nutrition guys, that convenience trumps health and well-being. It can be healthy, etc., but if it's not convenient, forget it. Forget it. Snackification of everything, good fat, good carbs, protein boom, but much more than meat. Fruit and veg are having a serious moment, and private label progressing. So that's just a few. And so it used to be about price, taste, and convenience. Increasingly, it's about health and wellness, safety, the social impact of our food, and the experience associated with eating it. Now it's place of production, care for the local economy, local is fresher, is healthier, provenance, heritage, same sort of stuff. And this is serious stuff. This isn't just a whim. And I liked how Glanbia, which is an Irish food ingredient company, in terms of just shorthand trends, what is it saying? As a global nutrition company, Glanbia is perfectly the consumer megatrends are health and wellness, active lifestyles, easy, convenient, and on the go, clean labeling. And that sort of covers a lot of the research material that's out there, to be perfectly. Hang on, I put that in. That was a little unusual. Did that get a lot of press here? Yeah. It's still going, is it? Yeah. Yeah. Good on you. But it's what is also happening in the world of food is that they're increasingly, it's easy for producers to access final consumers one way or another in a way that they couldn't have even conceived of doing, 10, 15, 20 years ago, pre-internet days, etc. If I look in my own market, if the degree to which Amazon is in the grocery business, at Christmas time you could order the Amazon pantry box, the Good Morning theme box, the Christmas cleaning made easy box, etc. Here we are with Amazon Local, where they're delivering high quality restaurant food from restaurants that we know and love. This is sort of fun stuff, really, but also never underestimate, that Amazon, when people say, no, Amazon's not for me, probably can't handle my product. Well, it sure as hell can handle monks. Yeah. Monks delivered via Amazon as a roll of Japanese. So the temples in Japan are a little bit slow on coming up with the goodies, i.e. monks for weddings, etc. So you can order them on Amazon. Want a monk for a wedding? Right, just... Or here, and this is true stuff, but it's just Amazon, eBay, and Shop Clues see cow dung patties selling like hotcakes. You wouldn't have put that down, would you? Saying, I'm in the cow dung patty business. I think I'll use Amazon. If you say you'd be crazy, not at all, not at all, not at all. And just look what you can do with the internet. Here's Very, which is a fashion website in the UK. I don't know if you guys get it here, but why I put it up is that so Very will say, get on our website. If you share your information with us, we'll share some deals with you. So you put your name, age, etc., what you like, da-da-da-da. Very has 1.2 million versions of its homepage. So now, when you check in with them, then they look at your details and then format that front page to meet your requirements. That's what you can do. And very small businesses can do that. It's so powerful. And I see around the world, here's P&G, which is Procter & Gamble, which is such a big, fast-moving consumer goods company, going around retailers. These big companies are just tiptoeing around retailers, because remember, retailers are their biggest customers. But they're saying, why would we use them? Let's take water, let's go back to pet food, paper goods, toilet paper, kitchen paper. Those are the things that you buy every month, and they're a pain in the backside. You need the damn things. Are we out? Well, all it takes is for the 4 or 5, for Nestle, for Kimberly-Clark, for Unilever, to get together and say, we'll just deliver. We'll manage the inventory for you at home. You don't even have to think about it. Is that a good deal? That's a good deal. Is it happening? Yes, it is. Do you think Tesco like it? Do you think Walmart? No. No. That's why it's tough trucking in big retail, and it will continue. And again, this sort of different routes to market. Here we are, we know Uber Taxi, here's Uber Eats, so from tap to table in minutes. And so this is just New York at the moment, moving to San Francisco, it's coming to London. So that we say 6 signature restaurants with each day of the week they'll have 2 of their finest dishes. And here we are, it's $15 for your lunch or for your dinner in Manhattan. And that's what you're seeing here is food service, food restaurants coming back at retailers. See, for decades, retailers with a convenient food offer were ripping share of stomach from restaurants. No need to eat out, because in fact I can eat out in a ready meal in the UK, for example. Well, now this is restaurants coming back. It's a brilliant market. So back into, there was something I said about big food, bad food. So let's take a look at you wouldn't want to get in Dr. Chan's way, I wouldn't think. I mean, down some sort of dark alley, she would sort of maul you over pretty badly, I think. There she is, saying big food, big soda, and big alcohol are as bad as big tobacco. And she's right. So just quickly, and a lot of this is sugar-driven, but also, I've noticed, I don't know about the nutrition, the sort of the weight management, the so-called obesity crisis, seemed to go off the boil. It got less coverage for some reason or another. So has the problem gone away? Well, just very, very quickly, here we are with, let's go through the US. That's sufficiently far away that nobody's going to be offended. So that's the picture in 1990, percent of obese adults, body mass index of 30 plus, and we're all in sort of greenish territory, so it's less than sort of 15%. Okay, as you move to the right and start to get purple, then you've got a problem. Okay, let's see how we're doing. That's 1990. 95, it's more moving into the 15 to 25%. 2000, so pretty much national, we're into 15 to 25%. Now we'll do it annually. Oops, no, I won't. 2003, oops, ticking into 25 to 30%. 4, that was a bad year down south, wasn't it? 5, we're well into 25 to 30% here. Mississippi, sneaking into 30 plus. 2007, 8, 9, 2010, 11, 12, 13, now into purple territory, 35, and that's the last year I can get data for. Yeah. Has the problem gone away? Clearly not. I mean, luckily, it's not a problem in New Zealand. Or what? So, big food, bad food. And big food are the Nestle's, are the General Foods, these big monolithic companies that we've loved for years. Now you're seeing in the Times of whenever it was, relatively recently, I'm sure, October 2050, act now on junk food to save our children. Now we're seeing government regulation coming in and hitting the industry hard. If you went back 2 or 3 years ago, the thought that there would be a sugar tax, no. Are we going to see that? Yes, we already are. Will it work? Who knows? But you can see the decline of big sodas. So Pepsi, this is in the US, gallons per capita, that it's in steep decline. ABC, anything but cola now. I mean, here's Coke and Pepsi trying as hard as how on earth can we get into other drinks? So it's water, and you can tell when Coke and Pepsi are interested in milk, you know there's a problem. And then, what's more, there's the seamy side. Fizzy drinks giant pays millions to diet experts to try and skew research. And so here's Coke with their Fairlife milk, where they're taking milk, splitting it into its components, and then putting it back together in a sort of healthier form. I think that's really dangerous if you mess with milk. People don't like you messing with milk. And a lot of this concern, big food, bad food, it's been about sugar, and quite rightly too. I mean, I was just looking a couple of weeks ago, a month ago in the UK, it was for coffees and teas. Just look at this here. I mean, these are big companies: Starbucks, Costa Coffee, KFC, Cafe Nero. They're big companies. And if you get the hot mulled fruit, orange, cinnamon, chai, venti, 25 teaspoons of sugar per serving. The chai latte, 20. Starbucks, 18. You think, what are we doing? Is this, And so big food just took its eye off the ball and said, look, we're just responding to what consumers want. I mean, I love this one. Here's Dunkin' Donuts. Hooray! Dunkin' Donuts are going to remove titanium dioxide from donuts. Good on you. That's what I say. and it begs the question, why did you pop it in the first place? And of course, we know why they did it. It was to whiten the flour. But you didn't talk to us about it, did you? And then this is just sort of pervasive now. Kellogg's to remove all artificial ingredients. General Mills to remove all artificial ingredients. Coca-Cola to say we'll do this, da-da-da. Mars to ditch artificial colors from its entire global food and drink portfolio. This has happened just in a hurry. And do they like this? They don't like it. Taco Bell to remove artificial ingredients, well, from most of the menu. So fruit ingredients, they have to be free. So what's this saying is, if you look over a period at the rise of allergen claims, dairy-free, soy-free, gluten-free, no additives, preservatives, all natural, organic, etc. And we know in the industry, I mean, why were they there in the first place? In most cases, it was to do with shelf life. So, there are real challenges here for food processors and food manufacturers. It's difficult, but people say, we want less. This I thought was just sort of marvelous at Christmas in Tesco. We wish you a gluten-free Christmas. Dear Lord. The other day I was in Brisbane, and it was early in the morning, and there was a bookshop just opening up with some alternative guy, and he was putting out an old-fashioned sandwich board, and on it said, gluten-free books. and I know it's childish, but I couldn't stop myself. I went up to him and said, funny, I thought you only read books. And he sort of didn't get it, No. And so, when I see products like this, here's Kellogg's, great company, etc., and here's its flatbread. So here's a convenient breakfast, hold in your hand while you're driving your car. And I'm thinking, I've read shorter books. Yeah, that's sort of crackers. And we don't want that. We clearly don't. This one, it's an old slide, but this ad is still used. At Nature's Pride, we don't think you should put anything in your mouth you can't pronounce. And, that damn right. So I think big food was caught pretty desperately with its trousers down, frankly. And if we take, say, the likes of General Mills, just as one example, they are desperate, racing around, trying to buy smaller companies with strong growth prospects. And if you look at the multiples they're paying, it's crackers, completely crackers. Here we are, General Mills swallowing Annie's, which is like gluten-free, organic rice shells or whatever, paying 4 times sales, not 4 times profits, 4 times sales. So you've got $125 million worth of sales. I mean, not a lot of sales really, and they're paying $500 million for the company. That's crackers. That's crackers. And here's Hormel and Spam. We love to hate Spam or love it. And Big Food desperate to align with natural-loving millennials. And so Hormel goes organic with latest Big Food acquisition. There is an unseemly rush to do exactly that, paying $800 million to buy an organic processed meats maker Applegate. It's just sort of absolutely crazy. Same we're still in meat here. Neiman Ranch, which was the doyen of natural meats in the US, now bought by Perdue, the largest chicken producer in the world. They need to, PepsiCo's innovation imperative in a world where small is cool. And so suddenly they found that what was their great strength puts them in a poor position, not least with millennial consumers. And I think that gives you an opportunity. Have you worked out which flag you're going to have yet? Probably not. I always thought it might lead to constipation. So if it's I was just making a guess. So I mean, I would celebrate, the simplicity, the naturalness, but then add some consumer relative adjectives. Again, the purity and simplicity of some dairy products. There you go. What's in our milk? Actually, it's milk. Okay, got it. So there's a huge trend, a few simple natural ingredients. It's very positive for farmers worldwide, or for farmer organizations. Say, these are the people who produce them. Do you want to see them? Do you want to interview them? And so it's about values and value and values, just going on here. And again, you see this sort of an enormous. How quickly did this happen? Last year, I think it was about March, I was working for McDonald's in Oak Brook, Chicago, and they hired me for the day with all their global chicken suppliers, where McDonald's was saying, I'm afraid, lads, you're going to have to cut out the antibiotics. And, there was deep denial by the industry. Didn't want to do this at all. No. But consumers saying, get on with it. Just get on with it. It's the same with animal welfare. We might not necessarily like it. And is there a threat here in New Zealand? I would have thought so. I mean, on dairying, I think you've got some issues here. So consumers want their meat free across the globe, and they want adjectives added and not additives added. That's my view. And, antibiotic free, hormone free, additive free, etc., etc. Okay, I'm just going to. So, moving towards the end here. This is the oldest slide I've got. And what I'm trying to say, where does the power lie in the global food industry? And it tends to get polarized. It goes to either end. So, at one end, it's about life science companies, those that own intellectual property and genetic rights. And then, at the other end, it's those who have access to consumers. Actually, it used to be retailers, but increasingly people can go around retailers now. And then everybody else gets the bejesus squeezed out of themselves unless they have something that they own and other people value. And manufacturers, the big guys, had something like global brands. And they're very, very powerful. But they're less powerful than they were. And so there are the big brands in order, Coke down to Johnny Walker, and almost all of them are struggling for sales and profits. All of them. These are ones which are not struggling, and you know them well because in history they've been really important customers for you. So you were producing the milk powder, Fonterra, who I love dearly, but come on, hand on heart, we know that in the boardroom there, what makes them feel really, really good is if they can build a milk plant about the same size as Jupiter. And that's what they want. But where are the brand? It's if you take Abbott, Nestle, Danone, and Mead Johnson, I don't know, probably 60% of the baby nutrition market would be spread about those four brands, I would suggest. And what we're seeing around us as farmers to consolidation of international agri-supply companies at a rate of knots. I mean, you really got to try hard to keep up. So Monsanto, yes, no, they didn't get Syngenta, but ChemChina got Syngenta. There's Bayer, DuPont joining with Dow, and then BASF. These are big, big, powerful companies that do very nicely, thank you. But these are the ones that I've been working with more recently. So, and it's a different experience to the New Zealand experience. Okay, so what intrigues me is if you take Christian Hansen, who are like in the probiotic business, in the enzyme culture business, Novozymes, and DuPont Danisco, which is now aligned with Dow. You've got three companies that within 30-kilometer radius of each other in Copenhagen. They're not the biggest companies in the world. They each turn over about $1 billion US. So, they're big, but they're not super big. And they are about the most profitable food companies you can find. So I was interviewing the Novozymes senior managers and saying, how can you increase your scale? And they said, it's very, very difficult for us because whoever we are interested in acquiring will not be anywhere near as profitable as we are. So we end up diluting our profitability. Now, how many companies do you hear saying that? So these companies, Hansen and Novozymes, will year in, year out, make 26% EBIT. Regular as clockwork. And they sort of came out of the dairy industry. Now, it begs the question, why didn't that happen in New Zealand? Well, they had to do something different because Denmark was never going to be internationally competitive in dairy because you could always wipe their clocks. You were way, way more productive, more efficient than they. They were obliged to look at another way to make money in an increasingly tight international dairy commodity market. That's why I've told it before, probably to some of you. That's why, let's say we're in New York and it's about 11 o'clock, a little bit peckish. Let's go for coffee and a Danish. We go for coffee and a Danish. You don't go for coffee and a Kiwi. You go for coffee and a Danish. So what's a Danish pastry? Well, it's 50% butter. That was the only way they could get butter into the US. It's always been difficult to trade butter. And the Danes also happen to be good at baking. I mean, that combination has been very powerful. There's so many examples of that. Quietly and regularly earning EBITDAs of 26 plus. EBITDA being one measure of sort of profitability, if you will. And then this is an area where I do lots of work, and we don't think of it as food, but it's food for animals, but not pets. It's food for farmed animals. So here's Novozyme just launching their first probiotic for poultry in conjunction with Adissio, which is owned by Blue Star, which is owned by ChemChina, which are the guys who've just bought Syngenta. Okay. And so what's happening? I get lots of work with Novozymes, with Merial, which is a Sanofi pharmaceutical company, but it's in animal health, with Biomin, which is an Austrian-based animal nutrition firm. And what they have is probiotics that you feed. It's brilliant for them because it's come at such a great time. There's all the pressure internationally to remove antibiotic use. Now, in many countries of the world, to this day, there's still routine use of antibiotics in poultry and pork. Why? To accelerate growth. So that's sort of going. So how do you get that growth without adding the antibiotics? Well, by improving the efficiency of the gut. So now you've got natural enzymes, if you will, that you can improve gut efficiency. So in the case of somebody like Novozymes, they'll say, what have they got? Alterian has been developed from a unique strain of whatever it is. Added to feed, it allows farmers to better control gut health. And it optimizes feed conversion by 2 to 2.5%, meaning less feed consumed to raise an animal. Now, that's a sort of wonderful position to be in when you produce something that has a quantifiable benefit. When you can say, it costs you $1,000 to feed this. If you use our product, it only costs you $900. And then the discussion between you and your customer is, how are we going to split that benefit? In most cases, we're never in the position. We can say, our product will help you in some way, but we can't quantify it. That's why these companies are so profitable. And they own the intellectual property associated with that. It's that intellectual property thing that is so important. Alltech is another company which is so good at this. And I was intrigued by this. If you look at so what are they saying? This is the animal feed, size of the animal feed business in China, and in the US. 180, so what have we got? 350 million tons of feed. So they're saying that's the opportunity we've got to sell our product into that feed business. Huge. So improving feed conversion efficiency, Alltech, Biomin, Novozymes, Merial, which is sort of joining up with this one. Focus on livestock gut health with enzymatic actions and reducing routine. I mean, these are products for their time, and they're so profitable. So globally, consumers less trusting of government, less trusting of big science, foreign sources of food, pervasive media coverage of food scandals. Shoppers want to know much more about where their food comes from. Most shoppers believe food companies should know exactly where every ingredient comes from. You've got social media, which is a great boon, but also it can be disastrous. And this sort of traceability and transparency in the supply chain underpins building trust with all stakeholders. You do well here. Is it Oratane in New Zealand, which is I think it's a Dunedin-based company, that really does well, where they can tell you if it's your product or not. So there's so much food fraud around the world now. It's as important to know if it's your food or if it's not your food. If there's a health problem with your food which has your brand, is it your brand? If you see what I mean. That's very powerful. Okay. So just to finish off here, I mean, in my mind's eye, and I haven't sort of worked it out yet, but I know you can help me. I put New Zealand, Denmark, and Ireland together. You're all, the three of you are tiny, like 4.6 million. God love you. I could invite you around for lunch. I was just in Changsha in China, which has a which you don't know of, and it's got a bigger population than you. And what are you famous for? Well, you're certainly famous for lamb and dairy. I'm trying to be as all-encompassing as possible. Arguably you're quite famous for wine, and honey. Yeah, there's pluses and minuses there. I'm not sure if you're famous for kiwi fruit. I mean, of course people eat kiwi fruit, but remember, most people don't know that New Zealanders are called kiwis, and they think it's just a green fruit. Green-lipped mussels, that's sort of deer, etc. You're famous for the All Blacks. I'm rugby mad, but then remember, that sort of tends to be males in about 6 countries. Tourism, that's you. Ireland, what are they famous for? For Guinness. They are food focused, but I couldn't think of, what's a famous Irish food? I think you don't get much further than salt beef and cabbage. Yet they're starting to get some serious food ingredient companies, and I put Glanbia and Kerry specifically. They're not short of charm. Like you, they're clean and green, but remember that isn't the point of difference any longer. That's a requirement. And then you've got Denmark. It is bigger, it's 1 million bigger. Famous for pork and dairy, crisp breads. But they've done extraordinarily well down here. Noma is the restaurant that wins the best restaurant of the world award 2 out of 3 times. And there's this sort of Scandinavian foraging that's the Danes are good at branding. They're way better than you, because they had to be. Whether it be Lurpak, whether it be Carlsberg, to this day in the UK, if you say where does bacon come from, people say Denmark. Really upsets the locals. And they're good at design. I think you're good at design too. So, I mean, just for me to finish off, I think there's a lot to be said for looking at others and working out to what extent, why are they successful, and are we missing a trick here? And again, just before Christmas, this week I spent in Denmark. What they're really good at, if we go back to the Christian Hansen, the Novozymes, and the Danisco, they're really good at letting little teeny companies do the basic R research, and they're really good at doing the development. And I think the Danes, it's part of national culture. They trust each other. They really do. And they trust their institutions. They trust their government, typically. In the UK, not at all. If you said, does the Ministry of Trade, Department of Trade help you in your export, people would just guffaw. No. So and because they were under pressure, they had to come up with Plan B, and that's helped them enormously. So I'm not sure what the takeaway from this is, but it's just, as I say, and look at the one, the Danes work 10% less hours than the Brits and are 20% more productive. I mean, does that get up your nose or what? You know, they're just good at and because they had to. And I think so the takeaway perhaps from New Zealand is increasingly you have to, because you're not the lowest cost in dairy. You know, because it'll be Argentina, because it'll be Chile. There'll be others who can produce at a lower cost. And so it's a good time to, you know, and we always end up saying you need to find opportunities to create more value. But I think the little window of time where for you to do that is just getting less and less. And on that bright note, I'll finish, and I'm sorry, edged into your time, but I know we've got time. So thanks, and if there's we're going to have a question period, so in we go when we're done, if that's all right. Yeah.
Well, he's on a roll. Let's keep him going for just a few more minutes while Andrew gets himself sorted out.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, David, I mean, excellent presentation. And I think what has come through very clearly is that the EU in the food sector has kind of captured the high value end. And when one looks at infant formula, for example, and you refer to it as well, I recently read that 70% of infant formula actually comes out of the EU, whereas we are third biggest, whatever, by volume, kind of total dairy product, which shows the imbalance. But now that the EU has deregulated the dairy sector, that keeps growing.
Yes.
I mean, hasn't the train kind of departed? Where do you see, you know, our next niche now that clean and green is just a requirement and no longer you know, everything sort of seems on the face of it to be against us. I don't want to be negative.
No.
I'm just realistic.
Well, I think there'll be another tick up for the boom bust cycle in dairy. But I think we're just going to have to manage that better than we have done in the past, because we're just going to get more of that. You know, if you take dairy, I know you've got more than there's more than one company, but Fonterra does dominate. And I always end up saying this. It's a real issue with producer-owned companies. Because look, there's nobody more welcoming of producer-owned. I sat on the board of one in the UK for 20 odd years, but farmers are their own worst enemies. So if I'm talking to a bunch of say the Fonterra shareholders in New Zealand, which it'll do every now and again, and if I'm saying, look, Fonterra needs to, I know it's trying to, but up the investment it makes in R&D and up the investment that it does in branding. Then the people in the audience, the farmers in the audience say, yeah, right, you tell them, David, yeah, bastards. Yeah. And I said, do you know why they don't spend more? And, no, why not? Because you won't let them. Because you say, send the money back to us and we'll increase production. Well, that doesn't do it. That just exacerbates the problem. Yeah, that has to stop. It's really interesting. Back to Danish Crown, which is probably the largest pork exporter in the world, remember, which is producer-owned in Denmark. They have an ingredient company called Danish Crown Ingredients. And they put this over to the right, away from Danish Crown pork processing, which the farmers sort of focus on. And they do that so they can get the rate of investment in R&D up. And so the rate of, if you look at R&D investment in the global food industry is 1% of sales, all right? In the pharmaceutical industry,
20%?
yeah, let's say 15%, okay, that's to get intellectual property. In animal health and nutrition, less than that, but maybe 12%. The companies that I was showing are Novozymes, Christian Hansen, etc., 8 to 11%. And if I take Danish Crown Ingredients, its sister company, the pork processing one, which the farmers are onto, spends less than 1%, but the ingredients company spends 5%. And that's where you get returns. You know, if you can plow in that money to make special products, which you can then get some intellectual hold on. And it's a little painful, but if you don't get into it, you're in commodities.
Beautiful words, research and development. You only get one more question, and it's a short answer.
Yeah, right, okay.
So I'm going to time it this time.
Yeah, right.
Is there any more questions? Or I scared you off. There we go.
Is there enough cachet and attraction left in the organic trend for New Zealand to focus on moving towards that, or is our distance, our provenance and our sustainable production enough? Given that clean and green is maintenance.
It's because it's got to be quick. Actually, it's interesting. There's been a tick up in organic. I mean, it suffered through the recession, although in North America it didn't stutter. It carried ongoing. So I think it depends where you are. So it doesn't work well for lamb because people say, well, aren't they sort of organic anyway? But it does for the likes of chicken or intensive livestock production, where there's a sort of concern that somehow there's something going on that you haven't told us.
David has been extremely generous with his time, and I recognise that having an international expert like this is a marvellous opportunity for all of us, so we will have a short session at the end of this. He's also agreed that he likes to be bombarded, but not by everybody. And so in terms of follow-up, the email address to follow up, particularly in relation to a copy of the slides in terms of PDF, there's a lot of knowledge that was instilled, is at the bottom of that page, foodandhealth@auckland.ac.nz.